Good morning and welcome to Happy Thoughts. We are discussing the church for better or worse, the ills and the beauty and grace of the church. Let me start this episode with a quick story. I was once at a gathering of United Methodist clergy, and our district superintendent, that's the person who is charged by the bishop for oversight of local pastors, was speaking to this large gathering of all the pastors. And without naming me, she called me out and mocked me in front of the whole group. And the way that she mocked me was she told the whole group that she knew a local pastor who believed that the annual conference, that's the geographical area that the bishop presides over, it's the institution of the church. So she knew a local pastor who believed that the institution, the annual conference, should be serving the needs of the local church, the people, and the pastor. And she went on a little diatribe about how stupid that was. She ended up by saying she found it hard to believe that that pastor had ever graduated from seminary. And I can't say for sure that everyone in the room agreed. What I can say is the vast majority agreed and nodded and clapped when she was done calling me out in that way. Again, she didn't name me, but I knew she was talking to me because we had been having discussions about the institution and about the import of the local church. Here's another story counter to that that takes place at the local church. We have recently had a new family who is attending our church, and as a part of getting to know them, I spoke with them about their life of faith, about what their history in church and in following Jesus was. And eventually, they told me why they were attending this local church. And they said it was because they had tried lots of churches in the area, but most of them that they had tried anyway, the prominent churches, were like Hollywood productions with lots of glitz and glamour and really slick high tech. And they were devoted to the idea of prosperity or those kind of things. So that didn't resonate with them. And they liked about our church that it was simple and that it was focused on Christ and not on the pastor and not on um, profit or profitability or God wanting to bless you with material goods. They like that it's a church that emphasizes discipleship and those kind of things. It was interesting to me. This couple, like many other folks that I've known over the years, failed to mention the import of the bishop or the district superintendent or anything having to do with the annual conference in their decision to become worshipers and followers of Jesus with us. That isn't to say that the hierarchy of the church and the institution have no purpose or that they're meaningless. It is to begin today's discussion about what goes wrong when the institution goes sour, when, as has happened in the United Methodist tradition, when things just go off the rails and numbers decline and the vitality of the church and its witness decline, and it's given over somehow to fringe elements who really are no longer talking about a life of faith. They're talking about political correctness, those kind of things. How does that happen? And I also want to look a little bit about what can happen to a local church, to the church community, when they go off the rails and begin to have long seasons of difficulty. Let's start with the institution, and I come at it from a United Methodist point of view. We have different polity than other churches, but really, effectively, they're all the same. There's just more or less power granted to the higher ups in different denominations. So in our denomination, the institution exists in order to give order to the United Methodist movement. That is to make sure that United Methodists in each little community and the large communities have a place to worship, and that in that place to worship, they are guaranteed a qualified pastor who is trained and certified by the institution. That's the proper role of an institution, to make sure that the leaders that in our situation they are empowered to appoint are trained and ready for leadership in the local church. So what goes wrong in the institution? How does the institution come to the disaster that it is right now and has been for about really the last 10 years pretty exceptionally. These are my views, right? I have not done sociological studies, but they're observations that I've made, and people may disagree. I've tried to be graceful in my assessment, but these are things that I have observed. What goes wrong at every level of the institution is that the leaders of those levels of the institution, be it seminary professors or district superintendents or bishops, they become enamored of the import of their position. And so one of the things I say is if you take a good, faithful servant Christian and you tell them that they've been elected bishop, it changes them. The best bishops are able to fight that change and retain their humility, but most bishops are perfectly unable to do that. And they begin then to think that everything they think and everything they say and everything that they want done are direct from God, and they have little tolerance for debate and not enough humility to consider the path that they're trotting. It's a political situation. So in a word, ego, right? I can remember in seminary realizing they're not training me to be a local church pastor. They're training me to be a second-rate theologian, right? Nobody had any interest in the local church. How should you teach a class? How do you do a funeral? How do you do a wedding? How do you plan a calendar year for preaching? How do you know what to preach for different situations in the church? None of those things were addressed really at all. Instead, they dedicated themselves to trying to again make us turn us all into kind of second-rate theologians, and then they foisted us on the church. And I realized in seminary that there was a distaste in most of the professors' mouth when they talked about the local church. They think of the local church as uneducated and a bunch of sheep who don't know anything and have to be given wisdom and insight from on high. And they instill that attitude in many of the pastors. So in a word, what happens to what happened to our institution, and I think to other churches too, is that the people who are granted authority and power by the needs and the design of the institution, they take that much too seriously, and that causes them to take their eye off the prize. So it's a highly narcissistic enterprise, and people who walk around believing that somehow they're different, better, and more pure in their thought and their form of Christianity because they have been given a title, they wreak havoc because their priorities become self-serving and self-aggrandizement as opposed to keeping their nose to the grindstone and really trying to figure out how to open the local church up to spiritual and numerical growth. The same attitude that I've talked about in seminary certainly is a part of the attitude. The DS that I talked about, who mocked me in front of my peers, that's what she was doing. She was clearly saying, this guy's an idiot. He doesn't support the group, right? He's not a part of our little covenant group of clergy. He sides with the local church, and that's untenable to her. It's just wrong, and she sees me as a traitor because I care more about the local church than I do about the annual conference or kowtowing to the leadership of it. That's an interesting and painful assessment, but it is true. So the difficulty in the institution is that people, all of us, I guess, on some level, who gain prominence or power through appointment or through election, then begin to see our own selves differently, and we see other people differently. Let me put it a different way. We begin to see people in the Old Testament way, which is there's insiders and outsiders, and many people who run the institutions see the local church as a bunch of outsiders who are an annoyance, but who actually pay the bills, so they have to be petted or treated nice once in a while. Those are kind of caustic remarks, but it is really my observation. I've been saddened and stunned how many local church pastors I have known as a United Methodist clergy who despise their churches, just can't stand them, and sneer and talk terribly about them. Those things, though that they are only communicated behind the scenes where lay people can't see them, are a poison to the institution and to the heart of the church. And almost invisibly, they work over time so that people who are truly seeking the ways of Christ and want a deeper experience of God just find other churches to go to, or other ways to worship, because they sense the disrespect and the sense of separation. So it's not something that can be changed if the system stays the same, right? If the institution stays the same and we keep electing bishops for a lifetime, my God, that's just the worst thing you could do to an individual. We harm them so badly because we give them a supersized sense of self. And the district superintendents and the bishops combined have immense power over clergy. Their ability to appoint us at any time at will without our being able to resist or say no, other than to quit or be found unappointable, is a power that's deadly to the people with the power. It's not good for them, and they abuse it and utilize it all of the time. So I think that the institution's design has to change and power has to be rotated. And I know there are problems going that way too, but you can't have somebody who begins to believe that somehow they're specially chosen and different than the rest of us ruling for a lifetime, because it has proven that it doesn't work. So that's the institution. The institution is guilty of arrogance, and arrogance that manifests this way. Their paychecks are made and their interests are served monetarily through the local church. So they're nice to the local church only in so much as they think they have to be nice in order to continue to draw their salaries and to walk around and have people who think that they're important. It's not a really high-minded or rosy view of the institution. But with 30 years experience in it, I'm just trying to weather the storms of leadership who I know despises anybody who cares about the local church at any level. It's the conclusion I've come to. Now let's talk about the local church. What goes wrong in the local church? Pretty much the same thing. Most local churches, in so much as they suffer, regardless of their size, suffer because of the narcissism of leadership. So a local pastor is not immune to the things I've talked to about with bishops and district superintendents and other stars of the institution. At the local level, pastors are put on a pedestal that isn't healthy for them, isn't good for them. It's kind of an unwritten deal, right? That the pastor will keep any of their real life that would be unpleasant hidden from everybody. Everybody will pretend that they're special and that they're different, and the pastor gets immense control. The church generally will do whatever the pastor wants to do. That, right? They cede leadership and power in that way, and the pastor's job is then to present a good face for the public. But all of that is fraudulent in its nature. Scripture does not set out the power of the clergy in that way, and if a church grows, right, to a large church or even to a mega church size, it's almost inevitable that the leader suffers the same way that a bishop in our system does, which is they suffer a delusion that suggests to them that even though Jesus might have some power, right, they are the prince of the church or princess of the church, and they get a sense of self that is unhealthy and toxic. And even if the church continues to grow, what is seated in the church is not healthy. I have pastored a church that was a country club church where a lot of really fine folks, but the truth is a lot of people who were attracted to a den of narcissism where the pastor thought more of himself than was warranted by anything in his life, and that's the hardest church I've ever pastored, to come into a church that wanted me to engage in that role and ignore the duties of the local church. It became a fan club for the senior pastor. And when he retired, I came along later, I'm not used to having a fan club and have never wanted a fan club. And that was a really hard thing on the church. And certainly it was hard on me. So ego, right? Human ego, the sense of my title or my position makes me right and means that you have to do what I say, leads inevitably to darkness in the human soul. The other thing that happens in churches in our system, because it's rare for a pastor to stay real long in a United Methodist congregation, is that with the change of pastors and the variety of leadership styles and ideas, et cetera, that you get, laity is empowered in a way in the United Methodist Church that it is not necessarily in other denominations. And very frequently, what happens is that you can have a community of faith with 95% people who are really sold out for Jesus and working hard for Jesus. And when conflict comes about how to spend the money, about what the church should be investing in, about what programs they should be doing, those kind of things, it ends up that the people who are willing to be the hands and feet of Christ in the community and who care oftentimes most for the church lose invariably in the debates about those things to a handful of bullies who understand that most ministers are going to be cowed if the bully threatens not to continue to fund the church or pay the bills, that kind of thing. And so it is often the case that a very small portion of the congregation, sometimes a family, sometimes a group of friends, take immense control because they control, or they make the pastor believe they control the purse strings, and they run the church the way they want the church to run, which is the antithesis of what the community of faith is about. All of us are supposed to be learning to live the way that Christ wants us to live. And so the bullies take precedent and begin to move the church in directions that they see fit. And there is a slow, quiet exodus from the church as families begin to sense the unhealth and the lack of leadership from the pastor, and they seek other worshiping communities. They move on down the road until really the bully and people who are fiercely loyal to the church, sometimes because they've got married there and they've buried their parents there and they've had their babies baptized there, or they're just loyal by nature, which is a lovely character. They get immune to, or they get used to putting up with the bully, and the bully will run the church until it's run into the ground, oftentimes swearing that it's everybody else's fault. So those are the difficulties in the institution and in the local church, having to do with human ego and pride, and really having to do with the courage to try to help a community of faith be honest and earnest and have some humility and have a sacrificial attitude. What's right with the institution? Well, the institution does in fact have the capability and the power of training and overseeing leadership. And in today's world, we know that it's very important for them to provide training and leadership, especially making sure that clergy are safe, that they're not going to molest or harm people in the church in any of those kind of ways. And the institution, it will always be necessary. I think we just need to tune it up and change the amount of power somebody can have for a long period of time. At the local church, as I said in part one, is the community of faith for me. So when I say church, when I think of church, I never think of the hierarchy. I never think of the institution, even the institution of the local church. I think of the community, the church. The community of church should be a place where people are earnestly working what we call working out their salvation, looking at Scripture, always looking at Scripture for new insights and understandings as their life progresses and they experience more of what Scripture talks about. It should be a place where individuals sacrifice for one another, where they care for and help each other in difficult seasons of life. Should be a place where there's great joy at being able to see one another, at breaking bread with one another, right? Those kinds of communal things. That is the Acts church. That's what the church, I think, was designed to be. And as much as I have talked in the negative about churches, I want to end today by saying, look, my experience of the local church has been varied, and my experience of the institution has not been varied. It's all been pretty much the same. But I've never, ever wanted to leave because the taste of community that you get in a church that's healthy and following Jesus is so powerful and so life-changing and so affirming in the right and healthy ways that it makes it worth digging in and trying to help create communities of faith that keep their eye on the prize, follow Jesus, and have a desire to serve one another and to be the hands and the feet of Christ in the community. Here in Visalia, that's the kind of church that we have, right? This is the most healthy congregation I've ever had the privilege of pastoring. And one of the ways that we may know that is we get as many people out for mission days, for things that we do for the community, as we do for any event that's just for the community. And some beautiful things happen here. As the pastor, I am not exalted in this place, and I wouldn't want to be, right? I'm challenged and pushed and made to defend decisions or thought processes. And oftentimes I have to say that I'm sorry, or I have to admit I was short-sighted, and we move along. It's just a healthy dynamic. The local church, when it is following Christ and when it is busy being a good community, is a thing of God. It is sacred and holy and beautiful. So that's kind of a broad spectrum look at the good and the ill in the institution and in the community of faith at the local church. Next week, I will be talking about what are healthy things that all of us can do, whether you're clergy or whether you are laity, to make sure that your local church, that your community of faith is healthy and is living out the ministry of Jesus in the way that he intended. I hope this discussion does not disturb you or upset you. If you take issue with it, great. Please call me or write at pastorstevevumc@gmail.com. I'd be happy to dialogue with you. You might have different views. You certainly might have different experiences. These are happy thoughts, right? That means they're things I have observed and meditated on, and I share them with you, hoping to open up discussion in your own mind, or maybe even to clarify some things. I do hope that even if you disagree, that you find the earnestness and the honesty with which I critique self and others. I hope you find that refreshing. I'm not trying to sell anything or trying to gain anything except for a clear understanding of how to go forward better than we have done in the past. So I do hope this is a blessed week. I will look forward to happy thoughts next week. God bless.